What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are going to recap and review exactly what happened on this 2020 episode covering Karen Read's trial. We're going to try to figure out how this could affect trial two and when exactly some of these things were said during trial one. We're going to focus on her statements for the most part and her lawyer statements, specifically the legal aspects of them and how they could affect things going forward. And of course, we'll answer your questions, and I can't wait to hear what you all thought about it. So hit that like button and let's get into it. So we have a situation here where I started watching this, and you guys know I don't know a ton about this case outside of what happened in trial. Didn't follow a lot of it before. I think there was some interviews potentially with Karen Read before the trial that I didn't watch and haven't seen. I know there was a bunch of hearings, obviously, in this case that were streamed that a lot of people watched. And some of those came up in this 2020 episode. But from my perspective, what I thought was kind of interesting was I thought this all happened after the first trial until I was watching it. And then I realized, oh no, this was happening during the first trial, which adds an element of intrigue to me because things are coming out, evidence coming out. You think you know what's going to happen, but you don't necessarily know how the prosecutor is going to present it. Somebody said, I learned nothing from the 2020 show. So I learned a few things, Drew. And again, maybe you know more because you've watched other things outside the trial, but I definitely believe that some statements were made specifically by Karen Read and her lawyers that I thought had a little bit of intrigue of it to me as far as how this case unfolded. So very early on, they show some clips of what's coming, and you hear Jackson definitely feeding and continuing the narrative that the story that the defense wants to tell. He stays focused. He stays in his lane. Karen Read, she talks about how her first thought was that John O'Keefe was hit by a snowplow. That was her first thought. Not he fell, not anybody beat him up, not an accident happened with, some of his friends, whatever, but that he was specifically hit by a snowplow. I thought that was interesting. She recounts the night multiple times throughout this video. She says it was cold, but not that cold. I knew I wasn't dying, but I knew he was. And she said, multiple times that she didn't say he was dead or knew he was dead. She was wondering if he was. And that's the big kind of question here. The I hit him came up a million times, and she stands pat that it was, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? ? And that's really interesting with some of the other things that she says later. Okay. Because when she talks about the did I hit him part, she absolutely says it was a question I didn't know. I thought, could it have happened? My mind was racing. But later, she says it's an absolute impossibility that I hit him. No way I hit him, not by accident, not by on purpose. And we're going to talk about that. And we're going to break down if we think that happened after she knew about the expert testimony and after her innocence was even proven to her by the FBI hired experts. So we'll talk about that when we get to those quotes. It was, brutally sad as they talked about John O'Keefe and his family life and what an uncle and a dad he was and what a friend he was and cop, and showing the pictures of him, just brutally sad, like unimaginable grief and how sad it was. Also, I want to say a bunch of you, actually, I'll save this. I'll save this part. So then Karen Read comes back into it, talks about her and John, how they met. They were very fast and serious, basically. They get into what happened that night from different perspectives. You know how 2020 is. This person flashing this video, flashing this, Ring doorbell camera, this testimony from the stand. But really what we want to talk about is Karen Read and what she had to say. They did mention, so for you guys that watched it, John, if you can put up a poll. I don't see Kelsey in here. So I don't know if you can put up a poll, but if you can put up a poll, if the 2020 episode was slanted, who was it slanted in favor of, Read or the Commonwealth? I'm just interested on what you guys kind of thought, and I'll give you my thoughts throughout. So they did talk about how the McCabe's and the Alberts have deep ties to the town. Read comes up again. And she talks about how she showed her dad the cracked tail light. He wanted to make sure it was operational, wasn't going to let her drive it without it. And this was the newest thing that, somebody said in the beginning, I learned nothing new. This was something new for me. Karen Read specifically explains when she started to feel other people thought she did it and why specifically she hired a lawyer or looked up a lawyer. And I think at some point, I can't now remember if it came into trial or if it was in an argument outside the presence of the jury, but she searched for a DUI lawyer that night. And when I was like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, I think it's good. Get a lawyer day one, minute one. Don't let any delay. But it was a DUI lawyer, which I was like, that's good. To me, that's just she thinks maybe somebody will accuse her of driving drunk. And so if that's the case and somebody just accuses her of driving drunk, that's a lot less than the charges that she was accused of, obviously. So searching for a DUI lawyer may not have been the worst thing, right? She didn't search for a lawyer where it's a lawyer for representing people for murder cases. That may have been worse. As far not from my perspective, but if they want to spin it to a jury inappropriately, that could have been worse. But she said when she went, so she said she talked about, hurting herself. She didn't want to hurt herself. She just didn't know how to deal with that grief. But she said she had to go talk to the kids. So she went to the O'Keefe's house to talk to the kids. And from that moment, she assumed that John O'Keefe's mom saw her cracked taillight and started looking at her like, you did this to my son. You hit my son. Maybe it was you. And started feeling accusations basically from the mom, even if not with her mouth, but with her eyes. So that was something new for me. And she said because of how she felt that night with John O'Keefe's mom, that's why she hired a lawyer. So that's not DUI related, right? That's not just, I think I might get charged with DUI. Later, she talks about how cops circling her house and she started thinking, maybe I'm going to get arrested for this, and starts getting worried about getting arrested for this. So would a jury buy that? Would they not? I don't know. But I thought it was interesting. And that also kind of explains the cutoff of all communication with the O'Keefe family, which I found the prosecution tried to use that from the jump as if it's consciousness of guilt, but this would kind of explain it, right? That she felt the accusation, but also seems like there's a lot of assuming to get to that accusation on Karen Read's part for John O'Keefe's mom. They talk more about the snow and the discovery of evidence and the leaf blowers. Read comes on again, though, and says the cops told her she needs to help them, so she did, and she cooperated with them that night, which I found interesting and true. She said, or they recount how, I hit him, I could have hit him, things like that multiple times. They talk about the blood alcohol content potentially being live. They play the part where Yannetti says there was no criminal intent. She had no idea that he was deceased or that anything had happened. And I saw people trying to use that saying no criminal intent means she knew she hit him. Yannetti knew she hit him. It was just an accident. I don't think that is necessarily how I heard him say it. But again, I don't have all the context of the full hearing because I didn't watch it. Then the interviewer says, is it possible you hit him? She says, no, it's not possible. Then they introduce Alan Jackson as the heavy hitter, the big shot from LA coming in. And he says she emailed him. And while he gets tons of emails, this one stuck out because it was a dead cop. And when he looked at the pictures, he thought, no way, couldn't have happened like the Commonwealth said it happened. So he took the case. Read said, or the interviewer asked Read, why would all these people want to be involved in a conspiracy? And she says, because he died and it just went too far, so they had to. So that's one of the big questions. Then did I miss the part? Then they talk about the house long to die in the cold. They talk about winning in the court of public opinion. They talk about John O'Keefe's funeral and, how it was a hero's welcome, things like that. And then they also compared it to basically a hero's welcome for Karen Read when she showed up to court. And then Turtle Boy enters the chat, right? And they talk about his influence and how he found a lot of these things and gassed a lot of these things up and made a lot of people aware of what was going on and the potential conspiracy and the issues with the case and maybe the negativity with law enforcement that ended up coming out of trial. They talked a lot about Proctor. And this is where I wanted to mention. So somebody sent me an article from Turtle Boy's website where he interviewed a juror, and the juror said they were not one of the jurors who vote or who reached out to the defense. So this is an additional juror reportedly. And I see a lot of people saying they hate the stash. I get it. It's just, I get bored sometimes. So I just bring out some different looks, keep you guys on your toes. But some very interesting information came out where the juror said that it was split. They went back and forth on a lot of issues, but some of these things that Karen Read says here in conjunction with that interview with that juror, to me, was an indication that if Karen Read would have testified, it may not have gone well for her. The jury reportedly did not like her facial expressions. They didn't necessarily buy the conspiracy, and they thought it would have been better, according to this juror, if the defense would have kind of abandoned the conspiracy theory and would have just gone with it's impossible, reasonable doubt, experts, scratches on the arm don't make sense. So I found that to be very interesting. And this juror also thought that Turtle Boy paid for the experts because they said a third party paid for those ACA experts instead of the FBI, and it would have made a big difference. And the jury did know about Turtle Boy and the witnesses and some of the stuff going on, the circus going on in the background. I found that all to be very interesting and honest from the juror. So, to give this Karen Read statement, all these statements, a little more context, I thought that was helpful. They get back to Karen Read and they talk about this. How many drinks? And so this is why I didn't know if it was during the trial, before the trial, after the trial, but this was some of the best evidence against her, I would say, for the Commonwealth. All the drinks, counting up the drinks. But what did we notice? And what did we discuss? Did she drink them? Did she finish them? What was put in them? And she responds to those drinks, no way. I had maybe 4 drinks and I didn't complete them. And they, of course, flashed the security video or the CCTV video of her, taking shots and drinking stuff. She said she was fine to drive. And she talks about driving to Fairview. But again, to loop back in what that juror said, the juror said it was concerning how much everybody had to drink, but it seems like all these people were professional drinkers, which again is exactly something all of you said throughout the trial. Higgins went back and had another drink. John switched from beer to liquor. They picked up on all that. And then she says they drove to Fairview. She drops John O'Keefe off. He walks up to the door and she waits for him to text back. 10 minutes go by. She's putting on some music. She's doing some stuff and he doesn't respond. So then she gets mad. And she answers this question from the interviewer. Were you angry at John O'Keefe that night? And she says yes. She says yes, she was angry at John O'Keefe that night. So the poll right now is about 70% think it was in favor of the Commonwealth, 30% think it was in favor of Karen Read. I kind of thought it was like they were asking questions to both sides. Obviously, they had a lot of John O'Keefe's family and supporters in there, which I think makes complete sense. He's the victim in this case. We don't want to forget about him in this case. But I thought they gave Karen Read a fair platform. Alan Jackson was able to tell his, theory of the case very forcefully. No prosecutors were on it. So I thought I could have seen people thinking it was biased either way. So she says she was angry at John O'Keefe. And while that seems like a very, honest answer, things like that, what would a juror think, right? Because again, if we think back to the interview that was just done with the juror and all the other affidavits from the jurors, none of them thought it was second degree. None of them thought it was intentional. None of them thought this was done purposefully. And from my perspective, those are all very important things when it comes to whether or not the jury would have voted differently on the intent part if they would have heard she was angry that night, because they didn't hear that. So maybe it seems like they threw out a lot of testimony because it wasn't reliable or they weren't really sure, things like that. But again, follow-up questions. Were you angry enough to hit him on purpose? No way. I didn't hurt him. I didn't intend to. I never hit him. It's impossible. It's impossible that I had, I barely had a buzz. I was perfectly fine to drive. No way I hit him. No way I accidentally hit him. No way I hit him and didn't know I hit him. No way I even wanted to bump him with my 6,000-pound car, things like that. So from my perspective, she denied emphatically, which is, what you have to do in her position. Is it possible anger set you into a rage? No way, no way, no way. They played some of the bad messages. Then Jackson again says, what were they trying to prove with the messages? She calls him 49 times after doing that when she's looking for him. It makes no sense. He's like, maybe she was being clever, the interview said, and he goes, nobody's that clever. Then Jackson said something I thought was the only potential misstep. Occam's razor. The most simple explanation is the one that's usually true. And the interviewer turned it around and was like, well, isn't that exactly the prosecution argued that the simplest explanation is she just hit him with the car, not that, 15 people are involved in a conspiracy. And Jackson was like, oh, and he kind of giggled and was like, no. But I thought that was interesting. And the interviewer, flipped that around on him. They talk about, the Canton law enforcement, how bad a lot of it was. Proctor again, how horrible that was. Then we get more from Reed about, being in trial or waiting in trial and moving into the hotel, how this is not a life. This is not how people are supposed to live. She talks about her clothes. I know people were hating on her, talking about her clothes, saying nothing fun, whatever. Statements like these give you an understanding as to why the state immediately said, we're retrying this again. Don't get comfortable with Karen Read. Don't think you've won, Karen Read. And they're immediately saying they're going to retry the case again. But it's not because they heard her say stuff like this, because we already know this as lawyers. We know it as prosecutors, as defense lawyers. This is a miserable life. It's constantly hanging over your head. She said multiple times, she talked about how she doesn't know what's going to happen. She could get convicted. She's thought about next steps if she was convicted. She cries when she's discussing her parents, which from my perspective, if there are potential jurors watching this, it could garner some sympathy. Apparently, I can't watch any of this stuff without feeling bad for everybody. Like you feel bad for John O'Keefe's family. Either the killer is out on the loose, whether it's Karen Read, whether it's somebody else. They don't have finality. It's still all hanging over their head. Karen Read, if she's innocent, this is a horrible life. It's a horrible way to go through it. So there's a lot of families and people affected, and it is brutally sad. And they talked about how people hate each other over this, relationships lost over this, even people that don't know anybody involved. And I think that's bad. I don't think we should be doing that. Talked about that a bunch. I hope nobody's doing that. We can disagree. You can see the evidence differently, especially the O'Keefe family. If they see the evidence differently, they know more than we do. They may be wrong. They may be right. They may be tainted. They may be biased because they know some people involved. I don't know. But to attack them for their viewpoints is not something I'm going to do. I hope they get some finality here, and I hope they see the truth as the trial comes out, whatever that truth may be, right? Because we don't know the truth. We think we know which way it should go, and I'm confident in the way I think the trial should have ended and the verdict that it should have been, but the truth is sometimes a different story. Then they, walk through the trial. They talk about the trial. They asked Jackson, are you willing to stake your career and legacy on this case? He said 100% yes. Just FYI, anybody in his position in this situation should say yes to that. They talk about the conspiracy. They talk about how long to die in the cold again. They talk about closing, how the defense says Proctor's name 33 times. The state only says it 3 times. Then they say something like, usually if there's more than one person in a conspiracy, somebody talks. I'm like, that's not my experience. It's not always somebody talks if there's more than one person in a conspiracy, especially when nobody in that conspiracy has been indicted, right? It's like if you haven't been indicted and there's not pressure of going to prison for the rest of your life, then why would you talk? Why would you flip? Especially if law enforcement, prosecutors, investigators, whatever is involved. Why would you flip? So I didn't think that was necessarily correct. Then they mentioned the civil lawsuit at the end. No comment from either side, which makes me believe the civil lawsuit's kind of going to be paused on the side. They did it because of the statute of limitations. Criminal stuff's going to happen first. Then they'll pick up the civil lawsuit. That's my guess. And they say Reed, at the end, they say something like, Reed has no reason to keep quiet. She wants to meet all of her supporters. So she's still going around talking about the case. She's not afraid to speak out. She's not afraid to make statements. But I will tell you, I didn't watch her other interview, but watching this interview, listening to Karen Read speak, I wasn't sure throughout the trial. Is she going to testify? Is she not? As we thought the defense did a good job, we thought probably she's not going to testify. After watching this, I think there is no way she testifies. I don't care if there's 2 trials, 3 trials, 5 trials. I don't think she's going to testify. I think there are some things the state could use to try to fit into their narrative. And I think the defense is better off not having her testify. And I think this makes more sense. And I think kind of what I've been saying from the jump, which people get mad about, I get it. Where's my guy that asked me if I believe the conspiracy yet? But you don't need the conspiracy for not guilty. And I think based on this 2020, based on the new juror interview, I think the impossibility or improbability, or definitely not beyond a reasonable doubt that it happened like the Commonwealth said it did, is the best theory to go on if you're trying to get a not guilty verdict, which frankly, I mean, Karen Read wants to clear her name, I'm sure, but not guilty verdict and going home free and getting rid of all this, I think is number one priority for her. All right, let me answer some questions. Hey, Peter, plan to go as Gomez Adams for Halloween. That's why you're growing out the stash. Very nice. No, but I could. I've done it before. She was honest and didn't dodge the questions, unlike some folks that testified during trial. I agree. She did not dodge the questions. Now, I will tell you it's a little different in a 2020 interview versus a trial as far as answering questions, but it's also very different when you're the criminal defendant and just an eyewitness, even if you are an eyewitness being accused of a crime. With the car's computer info and accident, I don't know exactly what you're asking, but we saw exactly what the car's computer had at trial, and it doesn't specifically show an accident. He said it showed things consistent with making contact with something. The jury did hear the mad calls. Yes, that is correct. Can the state use the interviews at trial? Not if she doesn't testify. But if she, so actually theoretically, yes, they could use them in different portions. Yes, they could. But if she testifies, they can definitely use them for impeachment. I would think if there's a way for them to get in that she admits that she was angry at John that night, I would try to get it in. And there are different ways to try to get that in. I must ask you a question, Romy, and people are bringing the questions. The juror talking about Turtle Boy and mentioning stuff for their families, were telling them about news coverage was concerning. 100% I agree. And that the Alberts and the McCabe sitting there was intimidating to them, and they knew exactly who Turtle Boy was. So much so they knew he was an integral part of this case that they thought he paid for defense experts. It's a problem. And the defense should learn from this, and you need to ask even more questions when picking the next jury. If she was a he, would 2020 show him picking out a tie? I thought the segment in her clothes was condescending. That's potentially true, but a lot of people had questions about it. And I think a lot of people had comments about it, negative comments, because she was a female as well. To be fair, it would have been a lot more boring. The defense would have had probably like 5 black suits. The juror reportedly said that 2 wanted to ask the judge if they could acquit on 2 charges. The foreman said no because they needed to decide on all 3. I did see that. That was also concerning. And these are the types of things and legal errors that were made that I think we need to do more questions, more investigating. And not just they wanted to ask the judge, they wanted to actually check the box and sign off on 2 out of 3. Hi, Peter. Thoughts on the juror interview and state's initial motion in limine to not allow the federal investigation to be brought in? Thoughts on this and second trial, if it goes to second trial? I do not understand how they're not going to let... First off, the federal investigation itself didn't come in. One of the state witnesses slipped up and said the feds, but they said a third party, a different party, et cetera, et cetera. I think if I was the defense, I would push for that to come in. Different ways, try to find out how it's relevant, try to find out how it, adds credibility, et cetera, et cetera. And the lack of an answer hurts the defense potentially if they think they paid for it. I think they even said nobody connected with the defense, but the jurors don't pick up on every single word, and that's what keeps lawyers up at night. I haven't read that motion in limine, so I'll have to check it out. But yeah, I gave you my thoughts on the juror interview. Smee. Hi, Peter. How does this affect trying to select a jury come January? I feel like it's impossible to select a jury. Smee, I agree. This feels like yet another case where it's impossible to select a jury. We're going to talk about Kohberger's case next in about 5 minutes. We're going to redirect you to that live. I'm going to take a break, get a drink of water. But there's been a couple cases where I think it's nearly impossible. We got the Adelson case coming up literally next week that they're going to plan for about a week to pick that jury, and it's in little old Tallahassee. Not nearly as big of a case as Karen Read or Bryan Kohberger, but big enough, multiple trials that it's going to be hard to pick a jury there. I would ask all sorts of questions about Turtle Boy, media, what you've seen, 2020, statements made by anybody. Do you already have a prejudgment? What do you think about Canton? So many questions that I would have stemming from the 2020 and other media frenzy during jury selection. Memory Monday, Take Me Back Tuesday from 2 years ago. I prefer you with the beard. I think most people do, Azam. I don't think you're on an island there. Where was the jury interview? I missed that part. It's on Turtle Boy's. Somebody tagged me in it. So if you go to my Twitter, somebody tagged me in it. I don't know how you search that. Somebody tagged me in it. I don't know exactly what the URL is. I don't have it saved. Yeah, no one saw a thing. I can't remember if that was from the jury interview or from the actual 2020 episode, but how crazy that was that people were in that house, walking out of that house, and no one saw a thing is so wild. So wild to me. All right. Any other quick questions? Oh, so people are asking. So yeah, I can't play the 2020. All that stuff is blocked and the video would be taken down and stuff. But enough people asked me for my thoughts and comments. Just wanted to recap it, give you my thoughts, give you my comments, and answer any questions you guys had about it. All right. Somebody said impressed by the stash. Yeah. Didn't know I had it in me, huh? All right. You guys are the best. I appreciate it. Hit the like button and make sure that your autoplay is turned on because we're going to jump into the breaking news from today in Bryan Kohberger's case. Venue changed, new judge. Why is there a new judge? It doesn't always happen, only under very specific circumstances. And these are interesting circumstances as to why there is a new judge. So make sure you guys stick around for that. It's starting in about 2 or 3 minutes. Some of you will auto redirect there, but the rest of you click over, hit the like button here, hit the like button there. Make sure you are subscribed before that even starts. Take a second and subscribe. I appreciate you guys so much. We're doing double duty today. So let's get to the second video. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.